it was true that the assassin took careful aim at the President of the United States. It was true that at the precise moment the assassin waited for, the trigger was pulled. And it was true the President was killed. But it was also true that the assassin missed his target, for he wanted John Kennedy to die, and that he was unable to do. For no man could take away years of lightning with a single day of drums. Was new, the dreams were high, the man was John Kennedy. In the early snow of 1961, an avalanche of people came through the streets of Washington with expectation and joy. They would come again in the autumn of 1963. The same people, through the same streets, to the same building. They would come again in 1963 without smiles, without cheers. For death, like a thief in the afternoon, would place a casket in the rotunda of the Capitol, the same room in which he had walked to his inauguration. Pennsylvania Avenue ended, the White House took over. Maybe it was only imagination, but the house seemed to change its outward appearance with the presence of each new occupant. Without a stroke of a paintbrush or the movement of a brick, it told every passer-by who it was who was now living inside. Within the last 30 years, it had reflected the strength and warmth of the Roosevelts, the courage and fire of the Trumans, the security and dignity of the Eisenhowers. And now, to those who passed by 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the house would have a new meaning: the youth, the intellect, and the vigor of the Kennedys. And so the pickets marched, and Washington, D.C. could see them. And as they marched, the President was drafting the 6 phases of the new frontier inside the gates of the White House. The Peace Corps, the conquest of space, an alliance for progress, civil rights, freedom, and peace were the 6 phases of the new frontier.
There can be no greater service to our country, and no source of pride more real than to be a member of the Peace Corps of the United States.
And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it.
That's what the Alliance for Progress means: to provide progress, revolutionary progress, through peaceful democratic means. I think it can be done. I think we set out on an important journey.
In too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens, and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street. That no free nation can retain any illusions about the nature of the threat, and that no free nation can remain indifferent to the steady erosion of freedom around the globe. We do not believe that war is unavoidable, or that negotiations are inherently undesirable. We do believe that an end to the arms race is in the interests of all.
And so the Peace Corps volunteers were to leave their country to go any place in the world that needed them and requested them. and the first group went to the Philippines, to Ecuador, and to Tanganyika. Came without guns and without uniforms, not to destroy, but to build, not to demand, but to teach, not to take over the weak, but to leave behind the strong. So came the Freedom Riders, busloads of Negro and white citizens headed south to have their voices and their very presence heard. State to state, there would be no segregation in the terminals or the waiting rooms, whether in New York State or Louisiana. There was no pay for a Freedom Rider, and there were no heroes or heroines aboard the buses. Their names were as unimportant as their creed or color. They were, most important of all, citizens of the country. But out of the headlines of disappointment came a voice of optimism and a voice of promise.
But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade we shall make up and move ahead.
The president was set back at the Bay of Pigs. In 1962, he could not be set back, or it could mean war. And a hushed and awestruck world listened to every word of the president.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
It was 11 days before the world heard the news it was waiting for.
My fellow citizens, the Soviet missile bases in Cuba are being dismantled. Their missiles and related equipment are being crated, and the fixed installations at these sites are being destroyed. We will continue to keep the American people informed on this vital matter.
Mirrored in the Washington that he loved was the sixth face of the new frontier, the quest for an end to all wars and the beginning of a true peace. On the date of his inauguration, the city that was a voice to him before was silent and waited for his words.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
From Dublin to Dunganstown to Galway and Cork, the president toured the green hills and smiling faces of Ireland. Perhaps it wasn't the family album of John Kennedy that made striking headlines across the world, but it was the personal John Kennedy and his family that made America fall in love for 2 years and 10 months. November the 22nd began without a hint that it would be remembered. The country awoke without knowing its president was to sleep. The morning came, but the sun would set in midday. The assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was waiting for the president in Dallas. Politically, he had been a Marxist, but psychiatrically, and more important, he preferred to be alone and secretive and hostile to all leadership. On the 22nd, he had positioned himself in the Texas School Book Depository building on the route of the president's motorcade through the city. It was over. In one blurred motion of history, the crime was done. They came outside the embassies of the United States and to their places of worship, and for a section of time in the life of Earth, there was one common thought on the minds of 3 billion people. In the process of thinking throughout that day in November, each person of the earth was drawn to a thought even more personal than the memory of the president. In seeing that respected man who had everything pass from life in a single unsuspecting instant, there was the thought of each person's own mortality, their own straight lines that began with birth, that would end with death, and the length between so unknown. The president, who was able to have so much under control, was not master of the length of that line. And perhaps his message to the world was exactly that. For everyone in the world received that message, no matter what language they spoke, no matter what God they worshiped. Was in the early 1960s, and the early 1960s will someday be a long time ago. The shock will be gone, and the persistence of the present will force memories to the background of our thoughts. The drums will be muffled, and the breeze of Arlington will be covered by spring and snow and spring again. But there will always be those moments in the lives of the ones who lived through that time when snow and spring will stop, and we'll hear the Boston accented voice.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which we are committed today at home and around the world.
The day of drums is over, but the years of lightning glow in everyone he touched. John F. Kennedy is now silent and invisible, but so is peace and freedom, and so is love and faith, and so are memories and dreams.